It was actually, I think, at around 8:30 in the morning. We heard the first siren and we're like, okay, that's weird. Every relatively new apartment in Israel has kind of a safe room, extra thick walls and a metal door. So we went into our safe room with the kids, calm, this is what we do. We know, this is why we have this room. Close the door. I stayed in for 10 minutes, which is what the procedure is, and then came back out, continued to eat our breakfast, getting dressed, getting ready to go to synagogue, and then another siren.
Oh, wow.
And at this point, we figured that something is up. Now, we are observant Jews. We don't use electricity or our phones on Saturday. So we weren't looking at our phones. Normally I'd look at the news right away and be like, whoa, what happened? There's a siren in Jerusalem, like something's up. So at that point, when we realized that something bad might be happening, we went in and looked at our phones and we were shocked. Like the headlines basically said, Israel's at a state of war. And this came out of nowhere. Like this came totally out of the blue. And so we still didn't want to, cause panic with the kids, but we, kind of took our phones to the side, my wife and I, and briefly read up on what was happening and the reports coming in of, thousands of terrorists entering Israel from the Gaza Strip and all kinds of terrible atrocities.
All right, guys. Hey, welcome to another episode of Mediocre Dads, where being mediocre is a choice. And you have to refuse to be mediocre every single day. I'm your host, Queon. I go by Q. And on this episode, I'm joined by a very special guest. I have talked to guests from all over, I guess I can technically say all over the world, right? I've spoken to different guests from many different places. But this is the first time that I'm speaking to a guest who lives in Jerusalem. And so, with what's going on right now within Israel, the country as a whole, right? And, for me, it's intriguing to get to talk to somebody who's there in that area, or there in that country, if you will, while all this is going on. And not to make this like a political podcast, but to get into the realm of the individual, to be able to speak to the individual and find out more about how they feel about it, and, and kind of their family life, right? Because it's really easy to look at things from a macro perspective and just say like, oh, this is what's going on, this is what's happening. But what about the families? What about those individuals, those fathers, those mothers, these kids, right? Like these are things that are going to be they're going to impact them for the rest of their lives. So I think it's important that we have these individual conversations rather than so easily focusing on the macro of the situation and trying to say, well, this side's right versus this side, or whatever the case might be. But we're not going to get into that. I want to keep this a very easy flowing conversation, right? And so I have a very special guest. His name is Noam. Did I say correctly?
Correct.
Oh man, I've been re-saying it in my head, and I wanted to make sure I was getting it right. So I was like, man, re-say it to make sure I got it right. So I know I'm here. I think it's going to be an amazing conversation. But before we get deep into the conversation, Noam, can you introduce yourself to the audience and tell them a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So you said it perfectly, Noam. I'm 38 years old. I've been married for 14 years. I have 4 kids, a boy and 3 girls. We're going on 11 and 9 for the 2 older kids who have birthdays in the next 2 weeks, and then 6.5 and 3.5.
Man, that's so 4 kids. Let me ask you, because I'm going on my 3rd, and my wife is very committed right now to hey, this is it, right? Did you and your wife, was it like, hey, we want just like 2 or 3, or did you say, hey, we want 4, we knew we wanted 4?
Well, we both come from big families. Mm-hmm. So I am the oldest of 4, and my wife is the oldest of 5. So I think it was pretty much a given that we were going to go at least 4.
Yeah.
When we had 3 and things were getting hectic, we were like, wow, are we going to have the 4th? Are we not going to have the 4th? That conversation lasted maybe a couple minutes, and it was clear we were going to have the 4th.
Yeah.
People ask us, are you done? Are you not done? It's I don't think it's a good thing to necessarily say I'm committing to be done, because, then if we're blessed with another one unexpectedly, then everybody knows.
Yeah. Well, so this is going to be that was going to be my next question, and that was going to be, are you going to go for another one, right? But like, I think when people ask, I get it, right? When you have, I think with today's age and age, if you have more than 3 kids, for a lot of people, they're like, oh, that's a lot of kids, right? You're like, I mean, I guess, right? Like my wife's mom, she's one of 7. My dad is one of 7. My mom is one of 6, and I think my wife's dad is one of 3. Yeah, one of 3. So it's just one of those things. Is like my dad comes from a big family. Her mom comes from a big family, and every time we visit, the whole family is there. Like it's a whole thing, right? And so I personally, after like experiencing that, like this like what it's like to be part of a big family, I was like, I want a big family. Like I want, I want to be able to get to, when, my kids are older and they're starting their own families, and, and they're coming over, and, you have all these people in the house, and it just feels like, hey, like this is what it's supposed to feel like, versus like if you only have 2 kids, it can be very like, all right, come on over, 2 kids. Like, because I've been a part of that, right? Where it just feels like I see the same people all the time, but like with 4 kids or 5 kids, even, like you have so many different personalities, you have so many different, like the potential of what's to happen. So I enjoy the big family thing, and so at least I'm trying to convince my wife to have a 4th. Trying.
Yeah, same. We always felt that we wanted to have our arms full. Like if you're gathering all of your kids in a big hug, that your arms are full, that you're at capacity. At the same time, 7, I think, like, it's really important to us that we can give the appropriate amount of attention to each kid, and that no one gets kind of lost in the shuffle.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a consideration when going, more and more. And we have friends around us with 6 kids, and their gaps are, really big. Like their oldest, I think, was this specific family that I'm thinking of. Their oldest was 17 when their youngest was born. And so like the mom and the oldest daughter are kind of, tag teaming on raising the baby.
Yeah.
And it kind of, it feels like it could get out of hand, but we're pretty happy with the number 4. We like the even number, no middle child.
Well, like, and that's the other thing to me, where I think it's like, especially as your kids get older, it gets harder in the sense of they're getting older, they're learning new things, and you got to deal with different temperaments and whatnot. But it's still fun, right? It's still great, and a wonderful opportunity that the Lord has blessed us with, to be able to have kids and raise kids and to have this family, right? So like I always think of this like, hey, like I just love the idea of having this big family and just being able to, like, hey, like you're this way, and you're like but you are, one's angry all the time, but one's just really like, I don't know why my sister's always angry. She's just a weirdo, you know what I'm saying? Like, but it's a balance, and it works out, and I love it. I love the big family, and I never thought I would. I thought for sure that it was going to be only 2 kids. I was like, you know what? Me and my wife, so we're high school sweethearts. That's why I got married so young. And so I had wholeheartedly believed it was like, we had kind of talked about it when we were young. We didn't know if we were going to get married at the time, but we were like, oh yeah, 2 kids is it. We're only going to have 2, and we're going to be done. Well, we had our 2 kids, and then it was kind of it was an unspoken thing where we didn't say we were done, but we didn't say we weren't. It was kind of just like, we're adults. We're just gonna do adult things until we figure out what's next. So like I kind of already knew, like, we're gonna go for the bigger family. It's just one of those things. So I wanted to ask you. So you work in, mentioned marketing, right?
Correct.
And so what led you to get into marketing? Because I want to ask that question. I'm sorry. Let me back up. The marketing question is going to come later, because I am very interested in a few different ways, but it's going to come later. First and foremost, so like, we were talking a little bit about it before, but you living in Israel, you have to you're forced to join the military. Like, you have to serve in the military.
Yeah.
I forgot what it's called. Is it called forced conscription or mandatory conscription?
Yeah. Mandatory draft. Yeah.
Yeah. So So you have to serve, right? So like, what was that like for you, right? Like knowing when you reach, I think is it 18? When you reach 18, that you have to join the military. So what was that like? How does that happen there? Especially for those who are not aware of that happens or how that works.
So it's very much part of the culture. When you're normally in 11th grade, you get, the initial, this is going to be a little bit dated because I was drafted in 2000.
Oh, okay.
Things are much more digital and online, and there's probably, the official IDF app or whatever to do this whole process. But I can describe how the process was for me and for my peers at the time.
Gotcha.
So when you're in 11th grade, around when you turn 16, you get your first letter, so to speak, from the IDF saying, come in, we're going to do some initial assessments. I'm sure you've experienced this too,
Yeah.
when you join the military. So there's a psychological assessment and there's a physical assessment, and, they give you your profile, which is, how physically fit you are. This isn't like if you're in shape. This is like, my profile is one click below the highest possible because I had glasses at the time.
Gotcha.
So they give you kind of a grade, which determines if you can go into combat service or not. And then throughout usually the end of your junior, beginning of your senior year of high school, you get invited to various screening days or sometimes weeks to, if you want to get accepted to the more elite units. But basically, putting that aside, like the vast majority of, 17, 18-year-olds, they finish high school. Many defer to do like a gap year program, either to go study some more or to do some pre-army prep. There are a lot of those programs here in Israel for gap year kids. And then when you're 18, 18 and a half, 19, you join. Either initially, there's also like a preferences form that you fill out. What kind of unit, what unit you want to go into, infantry, armored corps, artillery, intelligence, whatever. And normally, I think today kids know what unit they're going into or generally speaking, what type of service they're going to do. And then, draft day comes. Your parents usually take you to the base where the bus picks you up. Tears are shed, and then off you go to whatever program it is. And then, like I was telling you before, men have 3 years of mandatory service, women have 2 years, and you can choose to sign on more based on, what position you're doing within the Army.
Man. So like I said, I think that's pretty cool. And pretty cool in the sense of I think that it helps build a level of understanding, but also perspective, right? And I think perspective is huge nowadays because I think we it's really easy to look at something and say, well, from my perspective, and it's like, okay, well, unfortunately, I think you have a very limited perspective. And it could be an individual who is 35 years old or 30 years old, and it's like, hey, unfortunately, because of your life experience and where you've only worked in, I'll give you an example where someone's gone to college and then they went to and worked in the corporate world. It's like, hey, you have very limited experience of the world around you, and realizing kind of like the dichotomy of how things work in different countries or different areas and of the world. It's just, it's very, blinders almost on. And so, the reason I kind of going back full circle for me is I think that's important is because by serving in the military, it does change your perspective. It does force you to realize like, oh, there's this going on and this going on. And there's this army and this is how they do this here. And then this army, this is how they do this here. Oh, these are allies or people we work with and training with and understanding what the importance of training, understanding the importance of leadership and not having the hierarchical breakdown of like, okay, this person's in charge of me and I need to follow orders. I need to know how to march. I need to know how to move. I need to know how to communicate, shoot, move, communicate type style things in the military, like how to do all those things or whatever the case might be. So like it teaches you these things and it's almost like a foundational knowledge that you didn't really know. You're like, wow, I learned a lot. To where when you do leave, you're in the outside the military and more in the civilian world side of things. You're like, okay, like you know how to move, you know how to operate, you know how to think on your toe or think on your feet, you know how to think outside the box, versus where you're like, I've only been to college, so college has only taught me this is the only thing I know how to do it and the only way I know how to do it, so I do think
you grow up really fast in those 3 years, ages 18 to 21 here. It's cliche, but boys become men. Like, it really is.
But and I think that's a huge part of it for me, where I think because the value of men has deteriorated over the time, and I think we need more brave men and courageous men. It's really easy, and nowadays most of these young people like to say they are men just based off because of their age, and they have a job and they might pay their rent, if you will. I try to tell people, especially my soldiers, I say, hey, there's more to being a man just because how old you are, right? In the level of responsibility you have, per se, such as you paying your own bills for the first time. There's a lot more to it, and the military is really good at showing you, kind of being like, okay, you can walk into a room and you have several superiors, and then you'd be like, okay, that is a man right there. That is a man. I don't know what it is about him that stands out to me, but I want to be like him. And I got to figure out how to be that way. And especially for young people, that's where, especially for boys, that's a big deal. I think it's very important. So were you scared when you went, when you had to join? Because, knowing you're going to have to go at one point, and it's like, all right, I have to do this thing. Was there any like fear or hesitation of like, man, I don't know what to expect. Like, this is intimidating, like, what was that like?
Not really. I wasn't really scared. So for me, because, like I said, I had glasses at the time, and also I'm colorblind.
Oh, wow.
So I wasn't getting invited to try out to be a pilot, to be a fighter pilot, for example. And I wasn't invited to any of the elite unit tryouts.
Because you were colorblind?
Yeah, because of those two things combined, I had a lower profile, and I wasn't invited. But I still had a combat level profile.
Gotcha.
And so I convinced myself that I wanted to go into intelligence. And for some reason, I was kind of passed over from getting the invites to the intel tryouts. So the only unit or track that I got a call for to come and apply to was a communications officers track, a combat communications officers track, where it's a 20-month track that includes officers course in the middle. And it is, and when you complete the 20 months, you're placed as a combat communications officer in a combat battalion. So, infantry or tanks, armored corps, or any of the divisions of the army, they all have communications officers. So I went to that and I was accepted. It's kind of the track that I did is kind of a mix of like a techie type job, but with all of the combat training of any infantry combat soldier.
Yeah.
So when I went to the officers course is split into 2 4-month parts. The first 4-month is kind of learn how to be a combat officer in the IDF. And it includes just soldiers from all different units of the army, including the most elite units, including classified units, and, guys who you can only mention them by the first letter of their name.
Yep.
And so everyone is in there together. And then the second 4 months are specialized course, learning like what our position is, being a combat communications officer. So I had no idea what I was going into. I'm the oldest. My family, we're three boys and a girl. So, all of my siblings also were drafted and served, but I had no point of reference. I didn't know what I was going into. It was kind of like, okay, be here at this day, and then we'll tell you what to do. And I was, open to the experience. And I think, you mentioned before about learning about like kind of the great world, and like, that's, it's bigger than yourself. It's bigger than, your high school class or than your college or whatever. My experience was very much of learning about myself and learning that if I am pushed to my limit, then my limit is much more than I perceived it to be initially. And I remember that experience first, in basic training, like, crawl this. Okay, try harder. You're not trying hard enough. Crawl, 10 more meters, 20 more meters, and realizing like, whoa, like, look what I can do. It was hard and, bloody and, but like, whoa, look what I can do. And that was a very cool realization for me that I think was very molding really early on.
And I wholeheartedly agree, because I think a lot of people, when they join the military, we set these limits, these limitations on ourselves, saying like, this is, and it's usually based off our own experiences, or based off of like the things you've done before. You're like, okay, this is the line right here. Like, I can't pass this line, right? But then, you're put in a situation where you have to, and then you're doing it, and you're like, okay, maybe it's just because, I'm excited. I just want to show them I can do it. But then you do it again. And again, you're like, oh, I was setting the limitations this entire time. Right. So like that was me doing that, not anyone else saying me, no, you can only go this far. So it is a growth moment. There's a lot of growing, and I did, I love how you mentioned that I had to grow up very quickly. Like I joined when I was 19, and by the time I was 22, I was having my first daughter. And so and at that time I just got promoted for us, it's at NCO Corps, to a sergeant. And so I was stepping into my first leadership role. And so it was like, I'm a 22-year-old who has a kid on the way, and I'm in charge of two soldiers who are, they were the same age, and the other one, she's 28. I'm 22 and she's 28, and she's my responsibility. So it was very intimidating. It was very one of those things like, oh my goodness, like this is an experience that I'm just not like, I didn't know how to handle it. So it was a learning experience. But then I grew and developed, and I was like, oh, okay, this is how you do this. This is how you do this. And so it was just learning over time. And so you have a son, right? And, and so you mentioned it was just ingrained in the culture. Like, hey, you're going to join, you're going to go do it. For you, is that nerve wracking? Is there a sense of like, okay, how do I prep him to be ready for this? Or is it just kind of like, hey, we'll just live life, and when time comes, time comes?
It's a bit early to be
like prepping. He's your youngest, right?
No, he's my oldest.
But still,
he's turning 11.
Oh, okay.
In a couple of weeks.
Gotcha.
And I don't necessarily differentiate him yet from my daughters, because my daughters will also.
I keep forgetting. I apologize. The daughters do have to join.
No, it's fine. Look, there's more of a likelihood that my son will go into a combat role than my daughters.
Yeah.
But my wife is convinced that my son is very precocious.
Okay.
She's convinced that he's going to go into some intel position where he's going to decipher codes and, something.
Is that more of a
deep in a hole?
Yeah.
50 floors in a bunker somewhere where he'll be completely out of.
Yeah. Man. Yeah. Oh, so, so I guess so your daughter's, is your son the oldest, or is your daughter?
My son is the oldest.
Son is the oldest. Okay.
And then
sorry.
3 girls after him.
Said 11, 9.
11, 9, 6.5, 3.5.
6.5. Okay. There we go.
Yeah.
And okay, I guess, do you have you had this conversation, or has he asked like, hey, Dad, like, what does this look like, me having to join, the military? Like, is this, and I ask it because, again, like, conscription is such a thing, a weird thing for us over here, where we're being a volunteer force, where it's just kind of like, like, oh, you want to join the military? It's like, oh, okay, tell me why, or, whatever the case might be. But so for you, it's like, is there a conversation that you sit down and you say, hey, like, son, daughter, like, this is kind of what my experience was, and like, this is some of the things, try to prepare for? Or is it just kind of like a, hey, we all have to do it, and be proud and be happy when you do it, and when you're done, and you move on to the next thing?
I think that day will come when we talk about it in that context. I think right now their experience of the military, and we can segue here to the past year and 4 months or so, but their experience of what it means to be in the military, what it means to be a soldier, is how it has affected them.
Yeah.
Having, a father and uncles all around them serving hundreds of days over the past year plus. So that's really how they are experiencing it right now. Not so much in one day it's going to be me. I mean, I think it's a given. If you ask probably my 6-year-old, what are you going to do when you turn 18 and when you finish high school? She'll probably say, I'm going to go into the army.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of just the natural flow.
Mm.
But, when that time comes, and again, there are choices, like you can do national service, you can volunteer, like there are many different options.
Yeah.
To kind of, for each 18-year-old, for each high school grad to find their fit. But, it's definitely a part of kind of the natural flow of life here.
Got you. Well, I think that, like I said, I do think the idea of conscription is cool because I do think it builds a level of confidence in yourself, and it's you finding that confidence versus. And I guess what I mean by that, why I say conscription is cool, is joining the military. But when you join more or less forcing an individual, not forcing, making it mandatory that individuals join the military, right? And then having that, be able to have that self-realization, the self-actualization of like, man, I am stronger than I thought before. I am smarter than I gave myself credit for. And, versus, usually where you're used to hearing that from your parents of love and like, hey, no, I love you. You're strong. You're smart. You're good. Right. But then actually being able to put that to the test and say, no, I am these things. It's a good confidence builder. And I think it's great for kids. So I guess for you then, so, as you mentioned, since October 7th and what happened within Israel for you all over there, like what has been the hardest part for you in that sense, being a father and in being a person who has to be, who is, on call in the sense of like, hey, you got to be prepared to leave, whatever the case might be. So what is that like? What has that been like for you?
So if it's okay by you, maybe I'll paint the picture a little bit of what,
absolutely.
How this date that we're going to remember forever kind of hit us. So October 7th was a Saturday, and it was also a Jewish holiday at the end of a month of holidays. So it's a Jewish holiday where we celebrate the Torah and we complete, the reading of all the portions of the Torah on that day. And it's, usually one of the happiest holidays in the Jewish calendar. There's a lot of dancing, a lot of socializing in synagogue, and it's like a family and friends kind of day. And it's also at the end of the fall Jewish holidays when kids are home a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And, while we love them, we also love our routine and we're ready for them to go back to school.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the day that's October 7th. And we woke up at around 6:30 in the morning, even though it's a Saturday. Usually one of the kids woke us up probably.
Yep.
And at 6:30, we hear a siren. Now, we live in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is, if you place it on the map, so Israel is the size of New Jersey. Yeah, it's a small country. If you put Jerusalem on the map, it's probably 100 miles from the northern border. And so, which is where the northern border with Lebanon.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a few dozen miles to the east of the Gaza Strip.
Mm-hmm.
And we normally don't get sirens. Okay, there are certain areas of Israel where if you're living there, you're closer to where there are enclaves of or areas that are controlled by terrorist organizations that have shot rockets at Israel over the years. And they are, unfortunately used to hearing sirens.
Yeah.
Not all the time, but, every now and then. In Jerusalem, we normally don't hear sirens at all. So we heard the first siren. It was actually, I think, at around 8:30 in the morning. We heard the first siren and we're like, okay, that's weird. Every relatively new apartment in Israel has kind of a safe room, extra thick walls and a metal door. So we went into our safe room with the kids, calm, this is what we do. We know, this is why we have this room, close the door. I stayed in for 10 minutes, which is what the procedure is. And then came back out. I continued to eat our breakfast, getting dressed, getting ready to go to synagogue, and then another siren.
Oh, wow.
But at this point, we figured that something is up. Now, we are observant Jews. We don't use electricity or our phones on Saturday. So we weren't looking at our phones. Normally I'd look at the news right away and be like, whoa, what happened? There's a siren in Jerusalem, like something's up. So at that point, when we realized that something bad might be happening, we went in and looked at our phones and we were shocked. Like the headlines basically said, Israel's at a state of war. And this came out of nowhere. Like this came totally out of the blue. And so we still didn't want to, cause panic with the kids, but we, kind of took our phones to the side, my wife and I, and briefly read up on what was happening in the reports coming in of, thousands of terrorists entering Israel from the Gaza Strip and all kinds of terrible atrocities that I don't need to describe here.
Yeah.
And basically we went on with our day, went to synagogue. There were more sirens there. We moved the service down into the safe area of the building where we gather on Saturdays and on holidays, and eventually came back home. Later that day, or I think it was after the holiday ended, it was clear that, or during the day, there were many units, reserve units, that were being called up because this is a state of emergency. And there are very large, the majority of the IDF in a state of emergency is based on reserve units. And as being a part of a reserve unit, I figured I was going to get called up. And at about 6:30 p.m., I got the official call. It's like this automated phone call. It says, "Are you Noam?" Yes. Press 1. Please report to your base immediately. So basically, if you can imagine what's going on with our family.
Yeah.
We have a state of war broke out. We have sirens in Jerusalem, which we never have. We're hearing about people around us who are being called up to reserves. We're reading a little bit about some of the atrocities that are happening. While, normally we would process something like this as a unit, as a family, as two adults with our children, I got up and left, not knowing how long I was going to be gone because I was called up and it was the right thing to do. And our experience of this day, which is lasting till today, basically, kind of split. And we were processing it separately, my wife and I. And that was one of the most challenging things, to not be able to go through this crazy time together, processing together. And I was in active reserve duty until the end of December, and then kind of in a back and forth situation from January until April of 2024. Wow. So, 7 months kind of on and off of this disruption to our reality.
And so what's the feeling that you get when you get that notification, right? Like, is it, I guess I just want to understand the feeling, but I also want to understand is it when you get called, is it, hey, you're going to be gone for X amount of time and you can't come home type thing? Or is it like, hey, y'all do some things and then it, like, after, I don't know, say after a week or so, then you can go back home, or is it you come home every single night? Like, I guess I don't know, never having been in a place where, it's happening in your home. Like, I guess I don't understand. Like, is that something you go home every night, or is it just kind of like, hey, I got to stay here until I'm told otherwise?
So normal, like the normal or the ongoing activity of the IDF is local. It's protecting our borders. And so, regular soldiers are home, once every couple of weeks, once every 3 weeks, some units every weekend. That's the nature of the service here.
Gotcha.
It's not like with you guys where you get deployed and, you're gone for X amount of months.
Yeah.
And then you come back. So here it's kind of a back and forth because it's very small and all the bases are relatively close. Like the furthest base, is if you live in the north of the country and your base is all the way in the south or vice versa, it'll be like an 8-hour drive.
Oh, okay.
With traffic. So it's all very, very close. But on that, I had never been called up in a state of emergency like I was on October 7th. And on that day, I had no idea what to expect. I really didn't know. And my unit is stationed in the north. And everything that was happening on October 7th happened in the south.
Gotcha.
And basically the reason they called us up to the north was because they were afraid that the same thing that happened in the south was going to happen in the north.
Yeah.
And so they sent a whole bunch of troops up there to, to fortify the border and protect the towns that are close to the border up north. Excuse me. So I had no idea what to expect. I didn't know how long I was going to be gone. My job in reserves is not a combat job. I'm a communications officer in like a division level control room. And so I do shift work. I do 12-hour shifts because I came a little bit later than the person who is opposite me in the shift. So I was put on the night shift. So I kind of I was in a constant state of jet lag. I flipped my hours and I was awake at night and sleeping during the day. But I just, in that moment, it was kind of a mix of, I don't know what to expect. I'm worried about leaving my family, not worried for their safety, just worried about, leaving them in this hectic situation that we don't know how it's going to develop.
Yeah.
But at the same time, kind of, okay, it's go time. If not me and other people like me, then who? Like,
right.
we're here. If I didn't want to be an active reservist, I don't have to. Even though there's a law that, it's mandatory, but it really, the reserve units depend on the willingness of the soldiers in them to serve.
Gotcha.
And if you want to find a way to get out of it, you can get out of it.
Gotcha.
Nobody's going to force you to show up, and whoever shows up because they want to, and because they believe it's important. And so at the same time being worried, I said, okay, this is what we've been training for, and got to go.
It makes me think of the verse. It says, shall I send? Should I send? Whom shall I send before me? And who was it? Let's see. Drawing a blank. I have it in my head. I think it's Isaiah. I don't know if it was Isaiah or not. I don't want to misquote it, but I think it was Isaiah. And he goes, send me, I'll go. Now I'm gonna get mad at myself. I think it was Isaiah. I'm not gonna sit here and Google while we're having a conversation. But anyway, that's what it makes me think of, right? Because it's in this point, right, where you have you're like, hey, I have obligations, right? But I have my family, right? Like, your perspective is different now, and the reason for doing things is different. You have to, you put the priorities of like, okay, I love my country. I also love my family, and I love my family. And I would never compare the two in the sense of like, country over family in a sense, but it's almost a sense of like it's like, hey, the reason I'm willing to do it or the reason I'm willing to go, the reason I'm willing to be a part of this, and I'll speak for myself in this instance. The reason I still wear the uniform is because of my family, right? So if my family didn't have their support, if I didn't have their back, if I didn't have that love from them to do so, I wouldn't do it anymore. So it's kind of like it's kind of that double-edged sword, or that battle of like, hey, I'm doing this for you guys, or like, yeah, I'm doing this for you, and I'm but also like, you understand, like, there's a part of me, especially I think internally as men, is like, hey, there's a part of this is, hey, like you said, if not me, then who? And it's a big thing, and I commend you because I think it's amazing, right? And then two, I think it really demonstrates your character, especially your family already knows you. They know you really well, right? Obviously know who you are, but one, I think it demonstrates a high value of your character amongst the audience and those who are watching. But also, I think it demonstrates your character for your kids to see dad, to be able to say, like, dad, he loves us, but he's going to do what he believes is right, and he went and he did it, and that's a big thing. I like, we are the role models for our kids, and our kids are, they're like sponges, right? They take in anything and everything that we do, and so when they see dad saying, like, it's like I imagine sometimes when my daughters see me put on my uniform top, and I have to swing it around my other arm. It's kind of like a cape for a moment where they're just like, my dad's a superhero. And, when you know that you're a superhero to your kids, which I hope, I would no doubt believe that you're your superhero to your kids, it is like one of those things you're like, it gives you that level of confidence that you didn't think that you had before. So I think that's amazing. So, we have gotten the news. We got it yesterday. Yeah, it was yesterday that there was an official ceasefire. From my understanding, I guess it's in alluding to it's the end of the conflict over there, right? So what was that, receiving that, like, for you all over there, right? What was that? How did you feel when you received the news, and be like, was it, because a lot has happened over the year, and some changes have been going on. So, like, what was your feelings of to get the news? Obviously, I imagine you guys got it first, but that feeling of like, hey, we're at this point that it's basically done.
I mean, I think we're all still kind of holding our breath.
Yeah.
I think to a lot of Israelis, the headline of the news is not the ceasefire. It's the return, a hostage deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's really been kind of the number one issue that's been accompanying us, and it's been our nightmare for the past year and 4 months. So we're holding our breath until we see. We already know what it feels like. There was a hostage deal about a month and a half after October 7th.
Yeah.
And we already know what, as Israeli society knows what it feels like to see those people coming home and hugging their families again. And we're waiting for that feeling with kind of a sense of, we're not even sure, who is alive among these hostages that are in the deal to be returned. So that's just terrifying. And, what kind of state they're in. The announcement of the deal it's great news. And we're now kind of holding our breath until we see it play out and we see them coming home.
Yeah. And I guess, and again, it's kind of like when we were speaking beforehand, it kind of the realization, right? Like for you all, again, this is your lives. This is real life for you, right? It's not to say that it's not real life over here, but it's happening essentially in the sense in your backyard, right? Like, so like this is real, very real. You've experienced it very real for you. For us over here, it can be, for us, it's just kind of like, again, it's just kind of news, it's just news. And it's like, man, great. That's finally, right? Like super happy. But like you said, like, and again, that's an aspect again that I don't think that we don't think about over here is the sense of like, okay, hey, yeah, that's great news, and more, and that, of course, there's joy behind that, right? However, like you mentioned, there are still other things that need to happen, aka the hostages need to be returned, right? And then the sense of how do you go back to normal? How do you find normalcy again? And release that breath that you're holding of like, okay, everything sounds good. That sounds good. A deal's on the table, if you will, and the ceasefire, we're going to get the hostages back and everybody's back. But like, when do you let that breath go, right? And like, how do you, and if you do, are you doing it prematurely? There's still a lot of potential of what ifs, I imagine, going on over there. And so again, my main thing here especially for you is as a father, right? There's something like that happening unexpectedly, and your kids got years before they join the military or join the army. So like, is there a sense of, we need to do something, we need to prepare? There's like, needs to be a higher level of preparation of just in case, or is it going to be, do you think it's going to be like, we'll be able to release that breath and be confident, like, hey, things are going to change and things are going to work out for the better?
I mean, I think there are several levels of breaths or of exhales that we've taken over the past year plus. There's the personal level.
Yeah.
So, after, like I described, those 7 months of being back and forth from reserves kind of, and then I was back again for another 5 weeks in October of 2024 when there was, everything that was going on up north with Hezbollah and in Lebanon.
Yeah.
And getting to a point where I can relatively confidently say that we're going back into routine, and I'm going back to work, and, telling my kids that they're not going to have to see me put on the uniform in the near future, as much as I can predict.
Yeah.
Because those first 7 months, every time I came home, first of all, there was one time when I was gone, and one of my daughters asked my wife, when is dad coming to visit? And, that's just think of, like, I live at home, remember?
And
it's not a visit, but that's how it felt like to them during those 7 months. And every time I came home, if it was for a weekend or if later on, if it was for a whole week, they would ask me right away, when do you have to go back? and that was their reality. And they each took it in a different way. You know, the older ones obviously a little bit more mature, but also much less oblivious as to what's going on. And so a lot of the times they were the ones who broke down when I put on the uniform. Or my youngest, my 3-year-old, who basically just disowned me early on in her 3-year-old way. She was not yet 3 at the time when it started. And, you know, every time I came home, she wouldn't let me do anything. She just told me to go away. And it's funny now, you know, thinking back to it, but, you know, trying to keep re-entering and creating some level of normalcy while I'm home was close to impossible. And the kids, you know, it manifested in the kids in different ways. That's just, you know, one of the examples. So I think, you know, a personal level exhale was knowing that we can go back to routine. And there have been various, you know, national level exhales throughout the past year with, you know, some military successes and, you know, some of the bigger geopolitical things that are going on, and even just various heroic hostage rescues that we've had a couple of over the years that just suddenly surprise you. And, you know, in the middle of your day, seeing a push notification from one of the news apps, like, we rescued 4 hostages alive. Like, that is a national moment of exhale, and just people in the middle of the day bursting into tears. And that's the level, just because it's such a small country and everybody knows someone who knows someone who is involved in one way or another. It's a collective experience that we're going through, collective nightmare, most would say. But yeah.
You know, it saddens me to hear it. I know you said, you know, you can laugh about it now, especially with your pertaining to your daughter. But it saddens me because, you know, very few people will understand what it is to have to go and to come back and, in a sense, restart, right? And not even in a sense, you have to restart, right? And you have to figure out, where do you fit? How does your puzzle piece now fit into this master puzzle of being, you know, being the dad of the family? You're still the dad when you leave, and you're still the dad when you come back. But again, as you said, you know, your kids are not you. They're made up of you, but they're not you. And so they have their own individual personalities. They have their own eyes, their own ears, their experience, and how they're understanding these things that are happening. And so, you know, it's very hard. I had to go to Kuwait for about like 4 or 5 months. And, you know, I'd been to Kuwait before. I'll just be very frank. I don't like Kuwait because it is freaking hot. And, I'm originally from Arizona, and in Arizona, it's basically the same. However, Kuwait gets up to like 120 all the time. Arizona, that is like that is extreme hot, where they're like, hey, maybe no one should go outside, right? So like, but in Kuwait, like, I remember just being like, it is May, and it is 90 degrees outside and it's 2:00 in the morning. That's freaking awesome. I love that. I love that. So great, you know, right? So complete sarcasm. I don't. You know, I went, I did my thing, came back. And, you know, I remember coming down escalator to, my wife is kind of watching my oldest, because my wife is pregnant with my second at this point. So before I left, we found out she was pregnant. And then, you know, she's pregnant. And so she's doing the whole pregnancy thing by herself, essentially. And then coming back, you know, my daughter, I see her, she's bigger now. You know, she can say more words. She's doing more things, you know, like, it's just completely different. And, you know, I see her, and for the first moment, it hits me that I missed so many small moments that I can never get back. And it hit me hard. Like, all in this moment, I'm seeing her, she finally sees me, right? Because I kind of wanted to wait a little bit, but she finally sees me, and she's like, Dad. She screams, she comes over and hugs me, and just super excited to see me. But like, it was one of these moments where I was like, I'm hugging her, and she's bigger. She's got more meat on her bones. Like, just things are so different. And, you know, my wife's bigger. She's got a bigger belly, of course, and all those things. And, you know, and I didn't know how I was going to fit back into this routine that they had created without. And so, man, I'm sorry. It's just, it's one of those things where very few people really, really get it. And it's, when you say it, they're kind of like, oh, I mean, what do you mean? You're their dad. You just come back and boom, you be the dad again. And it's like, if only it was that simple. If only, that as much as I FaceTime them, as much as we had phone calls, as much as those help fill the gap. It didn't fill the gap of me not being there. Right. And so it's a very, very, very real, very real. So for you, getting back into this routine, getting back into the swing of things, are you happy to be like, like I'm in marketing, I do this is my job, this is what I do. Like, are you happy to be back in that space and be like, hey, like this is what I enjoy doing. This is really like, as far as job goes, or do you, or is there a new sense of purpose to be like, hey, maybe I want to do something else with my life?
That's a good question. I think a lot of people's lives and kind of systems of assumptions were shaken on October 7th. And I think it's going to take still years to pan out and see, like, how does that affect our generation, the serving generation. But I'm very happy to be back in routine. I started a new job in June 23, so 4 months before October 10th. And I didn't really get into the groove for my first, I guess you could say, almost year and a half of the job.
Oh, wow.
Because I was in and out of reserves and I was back and forth. And even when I was back to work in January 2024, I was a zombie.
Yeah.
I was a zombie at home and I was a zombie at work, because I was, being pulled out for 3 days every 2 weeks to do these night shifts. And I was tired and I was jet lagged and I just couldn't get my brain back on, both my home brain and my work brain. And so it's very, it feels very good to be back in routine. There is definitely, there's definitely a thought that's kind of lingering about, okay, there's a lot of work to do, not just as a reservist or not just militarily, but as a country. We have a lot of work to do to solve a lot of problems that reared their head on October 7th and everything that happened afterwards. And also there's a lot of stuff that was happening before, but we don't have to talk about that.
It's very familiar, I say familiar, at least I was doing my due diligence, of course, in prior to being in the military. So my job in the military, I am in military intelligence. One of the things is we always want to keep keep your ears to the ground, if you will, kind of be aware of what's going on around you and what's going on in different areas, different places. So.
Yeah, but there's definitely I think there's, for me and for a lot of people, there's this lingering thought of, are we just going to go back to what we were doing before? We were called up, we served our country, we sacrificed a lot. I'm talking about, fellow reservists.
Yeah.
People had great losses, injured, people lost their lives, and everyone was affected one way or another. And there's a thought of how can we just go back to the way it was? How can we not do something to make our life and our situation better? It's not tangible right now, for me at least, but it's a thought that I wasn't necessarily thinking before.
I think I think I really understand what you're talking about here. It's this idea that we're supposed to be able to flip this switch in our head and just go back to what we were doing before, as if whatever that time period was. I know especially what it was for you, but again, for me, it was about 10 or 12 months because I spent 9 months in Afghanistan, but it was kind of like this expectation of like, okay, you're back now. So flip the switch back to what you would do before. And this is what you remember, go back to what your life was, and cool, you're good to go. And you're just sitting there, you're like, but how do I do that? How do I flip the switch in my head of going on from being very high alert and very aware of kind of what's going on, making sure, paying attention to certain things, doing things that you weren't necessarily doing before, but now that you have to all right, man, hey, thanks for coming. Like it was like you just showed up for like a football game or something. Like, thanks for coming, pat you on the back, and you'll see you at work tomorrow. And like it's been fun. You're like, what? Like, no, like help me, maybe, I don't know, like not help me, like in the sense of, but like what's next? Like, how do I do this how do I just do that? And so I get
Or
that.
even if you're not used to it, like asking yourself, like, why is my brain not working?
Yeah.
Like, I I did this a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
I know how to do this, but I'm sitting in meetings and it's like 45 minutes just flash, across my eyes, and I have no idea what anyone said.
Yeah.
And I don't know where I was. And it's not like, again, like I said, I wasn't I didn't see anything terrible during the time that I was in reserves, and I wasn't in danger. There are a lot of people who had much more traumatic experiences than me, but just the, going back and forth, like that can't be denied.
Yeah. No, 100%. And man, no, I have a lot of burning questions. I have a lot more questions. And I, it's like, because it's like I said, it's easy for me over here to be like, I've read the news, I've read this, I've read that, so like it's really easy for me to say, like, I understand what's going on. And it's like, but it's really, again, but from a macro perspective, but from a micro lens of like, you and your neighbors, right, literally, of like waking up in the morning and going to work, or saying, hey, I have to go serve, and then I can come back. And then, again, it's just, there's so much, right? Again, we look at the macro, we forget about the micro, the small things of like what it's like to have to wake up and then be like, all right, I'm going to go to work today, I suppose, hopefully, but your mind's not all the way completely there, because you can't dedicate 100% of your mind to going to work. You have to dedicate it's almost like you have to parcel out your brain to say, okay, 25% of you is going to work, 25% is going back to what's going on at home with my family, 25% is going on to being a dad. Am I being, how can I help my kids to see that dad's still dad and I love them, and I'm trying to make all this work. And then 25% is trying to be like, okay, hey, I love, my wife, and, like, make sure our connection's good, make sure we're still good, and we're there. So like, you're parsing out your brain to so many different areas and trying to focus and align it, but it's just like, it won't happen, because it's not going to happen overnight. And I had to learn that.
Unfortunately, I'll say, like, there is a huge sense of community, because like, you walk and, you see your neighbors, the people at work, people, parents of my kids' friends, siblings, like, that everyone has gone through something. Mm-hmm. It's not like you're walking around alone, like, oh, I'm the only one who went through something. Everyone went through something, it. Like, my brother-in-law was injured. He's a tank commander, and he was injured in Gaza in early November, and he lost an eye. And, so it's really close to everyone.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, unfortunately, there's an enormous sense of community. And while not everyone understands the nuances of what each person around them is going through, there's a recognition that you're going through something. It's I can imagine someone like yourself coming back from 9 months in Afghanistan and just landing, and the 99% of the people around you, besides your family maybe, and like people who are close to you, have no clue, have no idea.
Yep.
And that must be lonely, and that must be hard.
Very, very, very much so. It's my brain actually did this thing where it just decided it was going to forget to what happened for the last 9 months, for that past 9 months, as if it didn't ever happen, as a coping mechanism, if you will. So, but that's a story for another time, I promise. But yeah, it was it is a very lonely, but and you do try to lean on people around you that were there to experience it with you. But it's again, it's one of those things where I was 21, and so I'm asking, I'm a 21-year-old And at this point, though, I'm different. I'm completely different from who I was before. So then it's like, at 21 years old, I'm kind of trying to figure out like, okay, how do I ask for help? I've never had to do it before. How do I ask someone like, hey, like, how did you like navigate like, experiencing this and, in the sense of like, what, like coming back and trying to get to normal things? Like you don't know who to ask. There's a lot. There was definitely a lot to it. But God willing, I got through it. God willing, he very, very, yeah, it was a time of my life. Still a little bit present today, but still a time of my life, that I wouldn't change for the world, because it definitely made me grow as a person and help me become who the person I am today. Final question before we go ahead and get off of here. You being there and having the experiences that you have, right? What would be some advice that would be a piece of advice that you would recommend to dads? Because I know not all dads are going to experience what you have experienced in your life and having experienced what Israel is in right now. But what would be a piece of advice that you would have for dads who are maybe in the military or just joining the military, especially for us in the U.S. over here, who are trying to figure out like, okay, how do I manage and navigate the dad part of me, but also the service part of me?
Two things that were helpful for me then, and that I can say in retrospect are could be helpful to others. One is if there's any opportunity to seek out other dads, or even other, Army people who went through somewhat of a similar experience, and talking, that's really helpful. We actually at my company, they brought in a specialist, like a psychologist, to speak with just groups of reservists who are navigating the return to their regular life. And it was really, really helpful just to hear other people's stories that were very different from mine, but just being able to share and being in a safe space like that. So seek that out, and don't be afraid to share if you can find that safe space. And another thing is time. I said January 2024, when I went back to work after 3 months of being gone back and forth from home, but not at work, I was a complete zombie at work. And then February was a little bit better. And then March was a little bit better. And then I got my brain back. And to people, to colleagues of mine who came back to a similar situation, a month after me, or a couple months after me, or 6 months after me, I told them, like, your first month is going to be zombie month. Like, you're going to forget, like, you're not going to remember where you put your brain. And time really does have an impact, and it will get better. And so not to panic in that initial reentry, and give it time, not just kind of like sit around looking at your watch saying, okay, where's my brain? But definitely, know that there is an initial period of time that is hard, and it gets better. Again, that's from my experience. I'm sure every experience is unique, but that was something that I shared with a lot of colleagues of mine who experienced the same thing.
No, like I said, I think it's important, right? I think it's a big deal. Like, those are your experiences, and those are things that helped you. But a lot of people, especially men, we tend to not want to open up or want to share. And so, it feels good to be able to hear someone else give that recommendation, especially having an understanding that this person has experienced things where they're like, hey, no, it's important that you talk to people. This is part of the healing process. It's part of the process of being able to be the best you, and then also be the best dad that you can be to your kids and to your husband, you can be to your wife, and the best employee that you can be, right? Because you're working, and you've got to make money for, to support your family and support, what's going on in your life. So it's a big deal, whether, you might think it's small, but I think a lot of men are will find it very helpful and very appreciative to be able to hear that. Because again, this, as men, we can be very reserved in the sense of like, oh, I don't want to talk about it. So thank you so much for coming on the show. It means a lot to me. It really does. It really does. As I said, I was very eager for this conversation and very excited, because it's just me being able to talk to other people, and especially from all over the world. It's meaningful to me, and it's like an experience that I never thought I would be able to live, where I get to talk to people. I know it's virtual, but still, like, it's experience is like, it was like you're sitting on the couch in my office right now, and we were just able to have a conversation. So it's It's a heck of an experience, a heck of an opportunity. I appreciate you coming on. That's all I got, guys. Thanks for joining us. And as usual, as I usually say, being mediocre is a choice, and you have to refuse to be mediocre every single day. Until next time, guys, we're out.